I was a prosecutor in the vehicular crimes unit in Nashville, Davidson County. So I felt like I'd checked the of service box, right? I'd put in a couple years in the DA's office, and frankly, just having that cushion allowed me to take a huge risk on. Luckily, my partner has, Wall Street background, so he knew that this was possible. I didn't know that you could even do that.
There's a difference between a dream chaser and a dream catcher.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the Dream Catchers podcast. I'm your host, Jerome, and we're bringing back a guest. We don't bring guests back very often, but my man Brian Adams is in from Tennessee today. And I'll tell you guys, I've got a great deal of respect for Brian. He's been there. I don't even remember. I guess it was probably 2 or 3 years ago when we first connected. And anytime I've ever reached out to this gentleman, he's been willing to offer hand. He started out his career after leaving one of the Ivy League schools as a DA or in the DA's office, and he grew, and then he left that and got into this company where they were buying, I believe it was office buildings. And now he's got this boutique firm, Excelsior Capital, hundreds of millions of dollars in assets under management. I'm telling you this only because he won't tell you guys this. And so, with that said, Brian, super grateful to spend a little bit of time with you this afternoon, man. It's always a pleasure when I get to hang out with somebody as wise in their young age as you, and get to dig in on what I think are some pretty interesting topics, man. So thanks again for jumping on with me.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me. I look forward to it.
Yeah. So let's go back early on, right? Because I think you believe in the American dream, or you believed in the American dream at some point on your journey where you go to school and you get good grades, and then you get a good job, and you start climbing that ladder, and then eventually one day potentially you retire and you try to live longer, or not as long as you have money, right? Because you don't want to run out of money after retirement. Um, but at some point you made a pivot. And so, we talk about exit number one being leaving corporate America. And while you weren't working at one of the Fortune fives, you were working in the system. And so I guess my question is, what made you decide not to just continue on the government career and then, get your pension? Because a good government job is what everybody's looking for. I don't think you grew up wealthy, so you made it, right?
Yeah. Well, I guess a couple things happened. One, and then this is to give people context. I was a prosecutor in the vehicular crimes unit in Nashville, Davidson County. And it's a great job, especially out of law school, to cut your teeth as a young attorney. And I liked trying cases. I liked working with police officers and helping victims. But a system that's not based on meritocracy is very frustrating. And to your point, being a cog in the machine, which I've realized we kind of all are, but it's really just how much agency and autonomy you have over what type of cog that you are. There was a moment where, I was working basically traffic court. I was dealing with people who had no driver's license, or a suspended driver's license, or revoked driver's license, which in the state of Tennessee is a C misdemeanor. And I was just processing people. And most of them were Latino, Hispanic. They weren't not able to get a driver's license because they weren't U.S. citizens, and yet they were working, right? So they had to drive around. And I mean, we would process a couple hundred people a day in that court. And at the time, the Department of Homeland Security, if they had an ICE hold on them, they would be deported. And I remember talking to the Homeland Security officer at the end of the day, after we'd gone through the docket. I said, man, where do these people go? Like, what happens to them? He said, well, they get put into a facility in Nashville, then they get transported to a bigger facility in New Orleans, and then eventually they get sent back to Guatemala or Nicaragua, Mexico, wherever they're from. And I was like, well, how long does that take? He said between 6 and 12 months, typically. And I said, well, how much does that cost? And he said, depending on how long they stay in the facility, between $75,000 and $100,000 per deportation.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, bro, I'm making 53 grand a year. And I'm costing the taxpayer 75 or 100 grand times 200, 300 people a day. And I just
A
said, man, I
day?
can't, for sure. Yeah, the traffic court operates Monday through Friday. And I said, I just don't want to do this anymore. This is ludicrous. Um, and obviously, this is just kind of a tipping point of a broader conversation I was having with myself, but I just wanted something different, right? Um, and I had the opportunity because of my wife's family to get exposure to this different world that I didn't really know anything about, of private equity and commercial real estate and investing and family offices, and just thought there was more out there that I could be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. So how did you prepare for your exit from corporate or from the district attorney's office? Because most people feel like they can't leave because of the golden handcuffs. You know, being an attorney making 53,000, it sounds like an oxymoron, right? Like money is supposed to go with the prestige of being an attorney. You know, when I came out of engineering school, I was making 52,000. So it's really interesting to see how close compensation was between those two degrees. But how did you like decide that, okay, I'm leaving and these are the things that allow me the flexibility to be able to leave?
Yeah. Um, like I said, that had that one moment of clarity, but it was after a number of meetings and conversations with people within law. At the time, I was thinking I would just move over to corporate law to get a corporate gig at, a local white shoe law firm, and I would double or triple my, salary or my comp package. And I was having at the time, I was having coffee with all these mostly guys, right? Older 65 to 75-year-old partners, because that's kind of who my in-laws knew, those people. And I would meet with these people, and I mean, they were uniformly miserable people, um, who, had not a great home life,
Mhm.
worked a ton, uh, didn't really enjoy it, didn't have great relationship with their kids. Usually there was all these commonalities, right? These fact patterns that you kept seeing over and over again. I remember one in particular, who's a managing partner at a very prestigious firm in town, said that when he looked back on his career, 45, 50 years, he realized that the value that he made for the enterprise, right, the firm, was really a correlation of how much time he spent away from the people that he loved.
Mm.
And I just said, I don't want to be in that business.
I like my family too much.
I just don't like that incentive structure,
Yeah.
because I think incentives really matter.
So, all right. How'd you figure out that it wasn't just about the money? Like, I mean, most men are taught, hey, you're nothing unless you provide. Like, how'd you get one, the kahunas, and two, I guess there had to be this philosophical, there's courage to express this philosophical divergence from what's normal.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be kind of brutally honest here. I married into an affluent family, and the way we think about the family capital, the partnerships, but I'm not talking about just, assets, right? Investments. There's also the family capital, the social capital, the relationship capital, and the human capital, right? The way we think about the whole partnership is to enable you to be of service or to be entrepreneurial. And so I felt like I'd checked the of service box, right? I'd put in a couple years in the DA's office. Um, and frankly, just having that cushion allowed me to take a huge risk on. And I think that's where we talk about inequality and this kind of concentration of wealth. I mean, the reality is a large part of that doesn't get talked often enough about, I think, is just the ability to take that risk on, right? I didn't have to worry about paying the mortgage. I didn't have to worry about feeding myself. I didn't have kids at the time, but, we had resources available to us, which allowed me to take a shot. And if it went up in flames, chalked it up to, school of hard knocks, and I could always figure something out. But that's what allowed me to kind of take that risk on, was this kind of the family that I married into, and also the culture and the encouragement that, given the way the world is working these days in terms of how much things cost, inflation, like then the realities of exponential growth of families and the overhead spend, which we can get into, but like you need a wealth creator every generation. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to maintain your purchasing power over a long time. That's just the reality.
Wow. So, like, was there a deliberate process that you went through in going from I'm not going back to the DA's office anymore and I'm hanging my shingle to do something seemingly unrelated to anything that I've ever done?
Yeah, it took about 2 to 3 years, right? So I left the DA's office. I joined basically a solo practitioner to hang a shingle. There were three of us total attorneys. And I knew that was kind of a step down. And then I had kind of a path that I thought, would get me to where I wanted to be. And so that's kind of what it looked like. Was I left, joined this really small group, did my own thing, and then was able to go full time, pretty shortly thereafter into the real estate business.
So, what happened in the real estate business that made you say, I'm ready, I can go full time, it's ready for me to be in it full time instead of, I assume it was a side hustle until that point.
It was, yeah, it was. We had an investor who committed $1 million to our fund two. And to him, that was a de minimis amount of money. And
Wow.
he was really a mentor, or he was trying to be, right? Or what I would call like a Dutch uncle. And as part of his teaching process, he said, listen, I'll make this commitment, but I want a condition on you going through a due diligence questionnaire process. So we brought in a third party advisor to diligence us, and we had to go through a full DDQ. And one of the red flags was that we weren't full time.
Wow.
And he said, hey, I understand like the way this works. I'll give you until this date to wind down your other affairs, and I'll make the money conditional on you doing this. And at the time there were three partners, three of us total. And my current partner and I like diligently went about trying to close those other ventures down. And then the third one wasn't able to do it, or wasn't willing to do it. And so he had left the partnership and the two of us stayed. And so it was really just kind of one of those, it's never a great time, but this forced my hand in a lot of ways. And looking back on it, it was a really great thing that he did for us, which I don't reflect on much. But
So when you get the news that like it's go time, you're either in or you're out kind of thing, right? How did you respond to that? Because I think so many people they're like double touching. They're ready to jump into between the ropes, but they're not ready yet. And so you jumped, but were you resistant, or you're like, oh man, like this is what we needed in order to be able to jump? Because $1 million for a lot of people, it sounds like a ton of money, but when you're feeing it, it doesn't really go that far.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Um, I was ready. I was ready to go all in on it. I had made that mental shift already. So that really wasn't the issue.
Okay. So you get in, it's you and your partner in the beginning. I call that period chief everything officer.
Mhm.
You're figuring out the problem that your company solves. You're figuring out what the need is and what words you need to say in order to get people to believe in you. Um, $1 million investment from a single investor is very meaningful in the beginning. And you said that was more of a relationship thing, and it was a small percentage of his, I guess, overall investable assets. When did you actually figure out that you had like this product market fit thing, and that like you could grow it because you've done millions and millions of dollars of investment capital since then?
I remember we had raised these small funds, right? So these blind pool vehicles, and they weren't big. I mean, gosh, a few $1 million, and then we scaled up to maybe somewhere in like the low 20s per vehicle, which in that world is not very big. But I remember we had an opportunity to buy a property in Nashville, and the fund didn't have enough capital. It was the end of the fund life or deployment, and so we decided, okay, well, we'll offer it to the LPs as a direct co-investment opportunity. We'll charge them no fees on it, just because we wanted to take down the deal, and so it would stretch our dollar a little bit farther. And luckily, my partner has Wall Street background, so he knew that this was possible. I didn't know that you could even do that. And I remember we raised really quickly, like within a couple hours of sending out emails, we were oversubscribed in that deal, and they were bringing in their friends and their people from their network who were outside of the LP network that we already had. And that's when I realized this is a real business. Like we could really do this. And so we did it again.
With no
That
fees?
was, well, yeah, we no longer do that, but we that was a small acquisition, right? And I remember the next deal we did was like God, we bought like a $30 million asset, and we raised $18 million. And I remember I was in a hotel in Dallas. I was there for a conference, and it was just incredible. I remember that moment of realizing like this is a real business. We can do this.
Yeah.
And that was kind of off to the races after that.
What about, is it just this velocity of capital coming in when you offered the opportunity that made you feel like this was a real business, or was it you raised more money than you ever thought you would ever be able to raise? Like what was it?
All of the above. I think the reality and the realization of this is an offering and a product that these discrete population of investors don't get exposure to very often. And there's a huge amount of appetite, and there weren't enough sponsors operating in that space. And so just knowing that you were bringing a solution set to the market, solving that problem, was really encouraging, obviously. And again, you have to remember this is in 2013. So crowdfunding was like just starting to be a thing, and we were sending manual emails out, right? Just like per person. It was a very different world. And that was really, I think, the shift there of, gosh, like there's a lot of appetite for this, and there's not a lot of offerings out there. This is great.
So we got lightning in a bottle. So I didn't ask this, and I probably should have. How'd you find your partner? Because I think a lot of people are scared to do it on their own. There's complexities that come with partnership, and there's also a need to get bigger faster with partnership because there's two mouths to feed instead of one. So how'd you find your partner? Because usually they don't last, as you said, with the third amigo. They just kind of
Yeah.
walked away.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I remember when I got into the business, a mentor would tell me that, typically these things are 3 to 5 year gigs, because they're usually commensurate with the cycle.
Of
And
the
when things
asset
go
ownership.
when things go sideways or when they go down, partnerships blow up. And if you look on LinkedIn, within like real estate sponsor world, or financial services or alts, it's pretty accurate. Like 3 to 5 years, people move on to a new thing.
Hey guys, as you might know, a very small percentage of the people who actually listen to this podcast are subscribers. So do us a favor, subscribe. In fact, we did some analytics and we found out that only 25% of the people who listen are subscribers. And our goal is to get that to about 75% over the next 3 months. So do us a favor, hit the subscribe button so you get notified when our new episodes come. We plan to bring immense value to you guys going forward as we continue to improve the content that we create at Dreamcatcher. Your dreams should be real. Let's get back to the show.
I've had my partner for 11 years now. I met him, a guy that I knew through Rotary, which is a thing I used to do, I guess. It was a small Rotary chapter in Nashville. He called me once and said, I've got a friend from New York who's in town. He does real estate. You should have lunch with them. And I had a lunch cancel on me that day. So I said, it's fine, cool. Like, I'll go have lunch with this guy. And we sat down, and within 10 minutes, I just thought, this guy has all the complementary skill sets that I don't have. He was looking to move to Nashville. He had married a local. He was looking to do something entrepreneurial. And I bothered him incessantly until he agreed to do the partnership with me. It took me a couple months, but I got him.
What did he have? Because I think there are people out there like, well, what is that? So what did you know that you were good at, and what did you know that you needed in order to be successful?
I knew I could raise, and I knew I could be the front-facing marketing guy. And he had a really deep finance background. He had worked on Wall Street for a long time, Cornell undergrad, NYU Law, Duke Business School. And so just, he knew how to structure the offerings and was really good at modeling and underwriting, and had real estate experience from his family. And he's a first generation immigrant as well as Indian. And so he just had a work ethic, and he still does, just a huge, voracious work ethic. And he had worked corporate law like I had. So I knew that his pain tolerance would be really high, right? Because I mean, if you're billing 3,000 hours a year, everything in comparison is pretty breezy, honestly. So just hit all the marks I was looking for. And likewise, right? He doesn't like being in a crowded room, doesn't like raising capital. He's not a great people person. So, as we brought on employees, it was hard for him to build those relationships. So it just worked really well. I mean, he's crazy in a lot of ways, but the two of us have built pretty good sized company together.
Well, I think it's more than pretty good size. So you guys go off, it's working, you're having momentum, you're having success. Was there anything that wasn't going well as you start to add people to the team? Because I imagine there was a hire, right? First it's equity, maybe nobody's getting paid, figure it out. But then you add that first person and they're expecting a paycheck every 2 weeks or once a month. Did that first person come in and did they work out initially? Or did you have to
Yeah, we got lucky. No, we got lucky. Our first hire was a guy, Jimmy, who was an all-star, and he was my ride or die for 5 years. He has since moved on to a different opportunity, but very amicable. We tried to retain him. I tried to hire him back every 30 days. I hit him up. Super talented, super hard worker, great guy. But yeah, it's one of those things that you hear these cliches get thrown around. And when you're young or new to the business, you're like, that shit's not real. But I mean, the one that you hear a lot is the death of an entrepreneur is a salary. And, I haven't pulled down a salary since I left the DA's office. I've been a pure K1 guy, and it's a crazy way to live. But my partner, I just believe that it motivates. And so every time we've had surplus capital, we put it back into the company to grow it. So it's just how we've always thought about it. But it does take some getting used to, if you're used to getting paid on the 15th of the month or whatever, every 2 weeks, and you can go long stretches with no income. I don't think it's risky because I know the business and I have confidence, but yeah, I think for most people, it's totally insane, probably.
So does that mean that you keep your lifestyle super simple? Because if you don't have any income outside of maybe a fee when you close on a deal or distributions whenever the properties pay out, and I have no idea of what type of rents you guys collect on a monthly basis. It seems like it would be very lumpy.
It is very lumpy. Yeah. It's very
Yeah.
lumpy. Yeah.
Does it make it so? There's so many different places I could go. And one thing I will do, so is, we were talking before you jumped on, you're like, man, I haven't really had an exit. But you guys have sold some of the properties that you've purchased, right? And
For
from my
sure.
perspective, every time you exit a deal, that truly is an exit because, I mean, if done well, I mean, you have 7 to 10 or 7 to 8 figures, 9 figures that you distribute amongst yourself and your partners, even if, it's not the traditional sense of building a business and selling them. But I mean, these things in commercial real estate are absolutely businesses. So when you got whatever you consider to be that first big check from an exit, what'd you feel? Did you feel anything?
Um, if I'm being honest, it was a pretty big letdown. Just because,
Yep.
you think this will solve your problems, and
It fixes nothing.
yeah. Yeah. And then, you go down a path of just wanting to hit bigger numbers because you think that will make you feel something. And it's not really positive feeling. I mean, it's great. I'm sending checks to LPs is awesome. But in terms of my own account, you've got to come to terms with the the fact that it doesn't represent your identity. And that took some untangling for sure.
So a lot of people would describe that as an existential crisis. We call it the founder's exit paradox. And that's when you have these questions about the purpose or the meaning of life and what your actual identity is and a number of other things, but it's not from loss, it's from an achievement. And it sounds like that's what you went through. You said it took some, I think you said unraveling. What is that process? Like, walk me through how you unraveled it or what you figured out while you were going through it, because I think this is the ugly little secret that nobody talks about when it comes to being in business and exiting and hitting numbers and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there's an old adage in the investment banking world that, you know, the saddest guy in town is the one who just sold this company for $50 million. And,
Wow.
you know, you don't get it when you're younger. And I certainly haven't made $50 million, but well, I call it the cocktail question test, right? So if you're at a cocktail party or some kind of event and somebody comes up to you and they start chatting, you don't know this person, they say, oh, so what do you do? What keeps you busy? Who are you? And if the first thing you respond with is what you do for your job, like, you have failed the test. Because at some point, somebody's going to come into your office and say, you need to put all your shit into a cardboard box. You got to go. Or you get put into a box yourself, right? And that moves on. And we've all been there. Like, a colleague leaves, somebody passes away, you have a moment of reflection, and then it's like, oh shit, I got to respond to this email.
Right,
Or,
back to business, baby.
yeah, like, you know, business moves on, the world moves on. And if you assign a lot of psychic value to that gig and you're just focused on building your resume and not your eulogy, it's going to be tough to navigate the world long term.
Did it take you a long time to accept that?
I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a work in progress, man, for sure.
When did you get serious about that?
Probably let's see, we're recording this in May. This would have been fall, winter of last year when I had a depressive episode. We just come off of two like huge years for our business, just unbelievable. And I was just miserable person.
Miserable because of the pressure to perform or try to best the last year? Miserable.
Because, yeah, I mean, you had done everything that you'd hoped to do. You hit these numbers, and then you don't feel any different. And so then you look for things that are make you feel different. And so for me, that was, you know, drinking, traveling, workaholism, like anything to make you feel something. And just didn't like the person I'd become.
So I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who are feeling the same thing or have been through the same thing, but just never felt comfortable talking about it with anybody. And you, and this is like the second time that this has come up, you are bucking the norm. I mean, you're having these conversations in real time on LinkedIn, right? You're having, I feel like some of these conversations on your podcast. What gives you the courage to do that? Because it's not normal in your socioeconomic community, right? To do this type of stuff. It's kind of just work harder, rub some dirt on it, trudge forward, and you're like, no, wait, like there's a whole person behind all these numbers.
I don't know if it was courage, but more just a sense of empathy in terms of I know after having a lot of conversations with a lot of people like middle-aged financial services guys, because that's who I hang out with, that there's just a lot of pain there and a lot of misery. And it's when you've got that, when you have the lifestyle that a lot of these people lead, and you've got the bank account that they do, society is saying like you should be happy and like you have everything. Um, and there's not really a safe place to say anything contrary to that. And this deal we made when we were kids was, if I had all the toys and if I did all the things and if I followed the rules, then I'd be happy. And the moment of realization that it doesn't bring you the happiness is really scary, because then you're kind of adrift. You're like, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. I thought this was the deal. Like, where do I go now? And if you don't have a safe harbor, I think that's why a lot of guys end up, in a very, very, very dark, dangerous place.
Yeah. Yeah. And so you're just you're on a mission to open the dialogue, or you're just sharing so that other people know they're not alone? Like what's the what's the punchline? Because it's really vulnerable. For most people, it's absolutely terrifying to admit that it's not perfect. Because I mean, there's a facade, right? I suspect you probably have more people line up to invest with you since you started sharing that stuff than prior to, but most people would think that you'd be killing the company by doing something like that. It's like, oh, that guy's not stable, you know?
Yeah. And I had people in my shop advise me against posting that stuff, for sure. I think for me, one of the outcomes has been, people like to invest with people that they know and that they're like them, right? Like attracts like. And again, there could be some huge inequality issues there, but the reality is most of my investors probably feel this way or have at some point. And what I did finally kind of appreciate is that many of them have gone through this journey or in the struggle, and they're thankful to have somebody that they can talk to about it. And if you can deepen a relationship, it's going to lead to other good things, right? So if they're reaching out to me to talk about this, then it leads to real estate and what have you. So it wasn't calculated that way, but I don't think it's really any different than people who fashion themselves as a subject matter expert on interest rates. I think people are attracted to them because they think they know what they're talking about, right? And if if people think that you're just a human on the journey, like a lot of us are, I think ultimately that's a good thing for you and for them.
Yeah. I've been listening to some content recently, and they talk about the three lives of people. There's the public life, the private life, and the secret life. And the quicker you can get to the secret life, the deeper the trust and the longer the relationship, because you share something. And one of the fastest way to get in a secret life is by being open about something that people don't traditionally discuss, that they are dealing with themselves. And I mean, this is literally what happened for you, even though you were just saying, hey, you're not the only one. I know where I was. Let me tell you where I was so that you don't feel like you're the only one. And there were probably conversations that were happening that weren't broadcasted for public consumption like this one is. This is, I don't know, I've just found the content um, brilliant. Like just the penmanship, like the way you've put the things together, and to see how people have responded to it, it's just been enlightening to see the challenges that people are experiencing on a regular basis. And particularly men. I think women are able to get together in community and process their feelings and so on and so forth. But men, like most of our relationships are totally uh, relying on work, right? And doing the project together, and that being kind of the only relationships we have, they're based on proximity. And if we don't intentionally select people to spend time with, then we end up in this place where we have a life that we aren't proud of or we're not happy about. And you can say that you're doing these things under the guise of making more money so that you can provide for your family. But when you actually do the authenticity test, you find out really quickly that that's not why you're doing it. You mentioned alcohol, you mentioned workaholism. Are there other things you're seeing people do to kind of, I'll call it, relieve the stress or get away from the pain?
Within my population cohort, yeah, I mean, I think workaholism is a huge problem. I read something somewhere that said something like, in 20 years, the only people that would know whether or not you put the extra hours in at the office will be your kids.
Because they're mad because you weren't there.
Right. Like, so I think it's a big problem. And alcohol and drugs are another really big issue, right? It's one of these things where if you want to effectively solve an acute pain, they're super effective in the short term, in the near term. Like,
They create
it
so
will
many
work.
problems.
It will work really well. It probably won't solve your long-term issues, right? And so I think it's endemic, to be honest. And the reality is, given how much time we spend working, it makes sense that we feel more comfortable at the office than we do at home. Like, the office is easy, right? Like,
Especially if you're in control.
and if you're good at it, if you are really good at your job and you get rewarded, then yeah, like, go to the office and work. If you go home and you've got to see your kids and your wife and figure that all out, given the amount of time in the day that we spend with them, that's a lot harder. And I totally get it. It's escapism in a lot of ways.
So for that person that's out there, they're chasing the 8-figure exit, because I mean that's what the listeners of this show are interested in. They're aware because they listen that the check isn't the thing that fixes it, right? They know that there's going to be some feelings, some questioning, some doubt on the backside of the exit, and that there might not be a whole lot of safe places for them to have that conversation as they are questioning whether or not they feel happy. Because I think there's some questioning before they actually accept the fact that I'm not happy, or acceptance of the fact that I'm depressed, or acceptance of the fact that I don't know what I did all that for, or I don't know what's now. What words of wisdom would you give them? Do they just not pursue it? Do they? What do you tell them?
you have to have some type of identity separate from the money or your job. You have to. Because I think if you assign your identity to the job or to the money, then you're acquiescing control over your life to that thing. And I think money can have energy, right? You can assign positive energy to it. You can assign negative energy to it. You can run your family like Succession, or you can run your family in a different fashion. And so it's not evil, but I think it does have this like karmic quality to it.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to know what makes you happy or what makes you tick or what gives you kind of a sense of purpose if you just work all the time or if you drink all the time. And so having some sort of process where you strip away these things and actually be comfortable in your own skin, which I don't think many people are, it's going to be hard. And so I would advise people to get a really good kind of peer-to-peer affinity network. So it could be EO, it could be YPO, it could be Tiger 21, whatever group where you can be honest and real and open to with people that are empathetic because they have lived in your shoes for a while, I think is super powerful. And it cuts through a lot of the kind of preliminary BS. You can get really deep really quickly. And then I would advocate for, if you kind of took all your time and resources and money and you created a pie chart based on where you spend those things. So taxes, insurance, legal, business, education for your children, whatever. I mean, how much time, money, and resources are you allocating towards your mental health or your physical health? Like, where does that look on the pie chart?
That's the one.
And I bet if you're being really brutally honest with yourself, it's like less than 5%.
Yeah, that's a fact. It's less than 1% for most people. Yeah.
And I tell this to my kids, any society or culture or group, you can determine their value system by looking at their budget.
Allocation of the resources. Yeah.
So if you look at the United States government and how we spend our resources, we actually really care about taking care of people, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, the defense budget. But, there's certain things that we don't allocate resources to, and that's a reflection of our value system. And so you can do it on a household level, on a personal level, as long as you're really honest. I would recommend actually bringing a third party to keep you real on that. And if you're only spending a couple hours a week getting your head right or your body right, what I tell people after my journey is like, if you don't like the outputs that you're getting, how you feel, how you look, how you operate, then you can change the inputs. Yeah. And it will make a difference, but you got to be real with kind of what the output looks like today.
Oh man, Brian, this was phenomenal. Who else should we have on the show, man? This was raw. This was real. Usually folks who are doing that have a couple of battle buddies who are actually doing the same thing. And I'd love to get more of these conversations going because these are the things that we need to hear.
Yeah. I'll get with you offline. I've got some folks that I could send you that might be good.
Awesome. All right, listeners, you heard it from Brian Adams himself. If you're looking for a place to put some capital, I don't know if you can get into Excelsior, but know that your money is safe and that they're always going to be real and transparent and authentic with you. If you're on that journey to your 8-figure exit and you're looking for somebody to go on that journey with you, somebody who actually understands what it's going to take and is interested in making sure that you're good, not just trying to figure out how to extract value from the enterprise, then hop over to our new website, theexitparadox.com, and grab that PDF we've got there that talks about the 6 centers of doubt that every entrepreneur is going to experience on the backside of their exit. Until the next time, your dreams should be real. We'll talk soon.